This is Tom May with KCAH. Let's get into the news. First, we need to go into something from Congress. This is a bill that is working its way through the House. Basically, this bill will have the government to take ownership of the nation's railroad infrastructure from the Class 1 railroads. Before we begin, let's look at the part of the bill that talks about the railroad. Section 2. Under this bill, the railroad infrastructure would be, quote, a common utility for the effective transport of people and freight across the United States. This infrastructure shall be open to all operators who wish to use it. The maintenance, upgrading, and expansion of this utility shall be undertaken by the federal and state governments. Funding for this utility shall be undertaken by the federal and state governments. The federal government shall have equal ownership of the railroad infrastructure with the state governments, end quote. This means that the government will own the railroad infrastructure, but will allow other operators to use it. This basically allows the railroad to be an even playing field. While the Class 1 railroads will not be absorbed by the government, they will not be responsible for maintaining their infrastructure, allowing them to focus on operations. In Section 3, which defines the standards for main lines and branch lines, quote, the main line is to have no less than 2 tracks, allowing for trains to run in each direction without stopping. The branch line is to have no more than 2 tracks, allowing for trains to run in each direction without stopping, end quote. This means that a minimum capacity must be kept. If this bill passes, it will end the practice of having main lines only be 1 track. This limits capacity and harms the railroads in the long run. This is not new in the United States. President Daniel, as governor of California, introduced a similar bill, putting the Class 1 railroad infrastructure under the ownership of the state government. This bill also has a clause that would allow for half federal government ownership and half state government ownership, should a bill like this be introduced in Congress. This bill was signed into California law in April of 2011, and since then, the mainline railroads of California have been continually improved and upgraded, and capacity has increased, allowing traffic to explode. This became a model for the railroads of the country. Since 2015, 2 states have introduced bills like this, Texas in early June of 2015, and Virginia in May of 2016. Multiple states are debating bills like this one way or another, with Georgia, Illinois, and New York being the most likely states to sign these bills into law. There's a lot of debate in Congress as to how much control the government will have over the railroad infrastructure, how funding will be allotted, and standards for operators. However, it seems like the bill would not allow government control to go too far, only allowing it to ensure a level playing field. We will see what happens. Next up is military matters. In Europe, all NATO members have pledged to increase their defense budgets to at least 2% of their GDP. This has been something that multiple U.S. presidents have asked NATO members to do, including President Daniel. President Daniel has pledged to defend NATO, but has also called on NATO to shore up its defenses as well. He said that NATO only works if all members are pledged to defend each other and make good on that pledge. The United States is planning on having nearly 200,000 service members on the continent by the end of 2024. This is for 2 reasons. One is to shore up European defenses, while NATO members increase their spending, and the second is to improve its commitment to its African and Middle Eastern allies. Along with the personnel, heavy equipment will be deployed to Europe, including tanks and artillery. This comes as tensions rise between Russia and NATO, as well as China and NATO, and Iran and NATO. This will require the activation of some of the reserves, as the United States does not have enough active personnel to deploy to Europe at this point. Recognizing this need, the Defense Department has requested funding to increase the size of its active personnel and reserve personnel numbers, which was requested in the budget for fiscal year 2022. This was approved even before tensions began rising, and people are volunteering for the military. To discuss the local effects of the increase in volunteers and tensions, I will turn to my colleague Gabriel Ray. Gabriel.
Thank you, Tom. Many people in California are concerned that the military movements of NATO and increasing tensions between NATO and its adversaries could lead to war. Leaders in China, Iran, Russia, and North Korea claim that these movements are the West looking for an excuse for war, and that they will deploy their forces as needed. This has resulted in encounters between NATO and Russian aircraft over the skies of Estonia and Latvia, as well as the Baltic Sea, and between the US and Chinese navies in the South China Sea. While these encounters have not led to war, there is concern that an accident could spark war. President Nenstill has assured the American people that every action is being taken to ensure that accidents do not happen, though no leader can guarantee this. We will be monitoring the situation as it develops, and we ask the public to stay informed on what is going on. Now let's go to the local. Now let's go to the local news. Let's go to local news. Starting in Los Angeles, the Metro. Dang it! I'm fine. Give me a second. The Metrolink Loop line is complete, which connects Los Angeles with surrounding cities and neighborhoods. I'm not sure if this will have a name like the other lines in the Metrolink system. This might not have a name at all, I don't know. This is part of an expansion of the transit system in LA. When I say expansion, that's an understatement. LA is majorly improving its transit system. I'm talking new light rail lines, new bus lines, new subway lines, increased frequency on major services, new stations, all of that. The next phase of the project is the creation of 2 new subway lines, both connecting the area inside the Metrolink loop. This creates pretty much an X shape. The first line starts in Los Angeles Airport and then ends in Lakewood. The second line starts in Los Angeles Union Station and ends in Redondo Beach. Seems like there will be a station in the middle of the X where the lines will meet, which will connect them both. This will likely be in Compton, I'm assuming. A subway line is planned to connect Norwalk from Manhattan Beach, Gardena, I think that's it, and Compton. In total, 8 subway lines, 12 light rail lines, and 40 bus lines are planned to be introduced over the next decade. This also includes 450 stations. In addition, cities in Orange County, such as Fullerton, Anaheim, Irvine, and Santa Ana, are also introducing light rail lines of their own, a combined 20. Even cities in the Inland Empire are planning transit improvements. Along the I-10 corridor alone, 20 rail lines are planned in Ontario, Fontana, San Bernardino, Mentone, and Redlands. When I say 450 stations, I mean that's combined between the light rail lines and the subway lines. Sorry, just want to get that out of the way. Improved bus service is planned for the San Gorgonio Pass and the Coachella Valley. I think they may even have a bus rapid transit line between San Bernardino and Indio along the I-10 or something like that. Efforts are being made to connect warehouses and businesses with rail, taking trucks off the roads and better connecting warehouses with the rail network. This was already started under President Nenstill's time as governor, and this is just continuing. Excuse me, I'm sorry. This will better allow businesses to connect with not just the rail network itself, but to better connect with its customers and with manufacturers, as rail is a more efficient and faster way of delivering cargo, especially over long distances than truck. Overall, Southern California is improving its transit system, but this will take years to finish. Even with the measures that were started under President Nenstill's time as governor, we're only starting to see the effects of this now, and even then, it's probably going to take a few more years before it really becomes known. All right, let's look up at the political situation. Education reforms have taken effect in Southern California, adding to the reforms that President Nenstill made as governor during the early 2010s. More teachers are being hired and more people are enrolling in K-12 education. This is because access to K-12 education has been made easier, especially for students with special educational needs and to students that are in poverty-stricken areas. It's estimated that by the end of the decade, 20 to 40,000 teachers will be hired across Southern California alone. Nationwide, that amounts to maybe 4 million teachers. This compares with 300,000 teachers hired in California following Governor Nelson's reforms. So this is basically adding on to the reforms that were already passed by the governor himself. On the other hand, many in the education system's bureaucracy are leaving due to the lack of support from Washington. Following the passing of the Education Reform Act, original name, the bureaucracy of the education system lost a lot of the funding that it usually gets. This funding, which typically speaking, when you improve the education system, it's typically meant to improve the system from the bottom up. But generally speaking, while it's originally marked for students, teachers, and the system itself, which would improve the system, the bureaucracy basically eats up the funding, which results in the same problems that the system faces today, and basically this has been going on for the last 50 years. Which is why the bureaucracy was so big. Well, no more. President Nixon made a point of tackling bureaucracy in his education bill, shifting it from a top-down system to a bottom-up system. This means that money directly goes to the schools, teachers, staff, and students. You'll see how this affects the education system over the next few years. However, effects are already being seen. Next up, economics. In terms of jobs, nearly 100,000 have been created nationwide this month. This is a drop from last month, which has some experts worried. The COVID-19 pandemic hit the economy hard, and many people are still having a hard time finding work. Some worry that the U.S. is heading towards a recession due to the pandemic and the stock market. We'll have to wait and see. It is not easy to predict recessions, so it is not clear whether one may happen. Regardless, Americans are advised to prepare for recession, such as putting money into savings accounts. Gas prices have not gone down, though they have not gone up. This is due to the president releasing oil from the Strategic Oil Reserve starting in April. While this has helped to increase the supply, it alone will not be the solution. Oil companies have been asked to drill for more oil, and oil refineries will likely begin expanding capacity soon. Here in Southern California, oil production has been expanding in the Inland Empire along with the refinery capacity. It started during President Nelson's time as governor, and effects are starting to be seen, with production reaching 4 million barrels in 2016. And it's remained similar ever since. That's in the Inland Empire. If you're thinking Southern California as a whole, it's closer to maybe 5.5 million barrels if you combine the Los Angeles oil industry and the oil industry in the rest of Southern California. That does not include offshore oil drilling. I think that's possibly another 2 billion. We'll clarify that in the next report if we get to it. The oil industry isn't actually that big in California, not as big as it is in other states, but it's here, and I guess people don't know it. A lot of what you'd think would be normal buildings in LA, as an example, like tall, slender buildings, those are actually oil wells in the skies. Which makes sense because a lot of times they're in commercial areas, or they're in areas where you wouldn't want that kind of stuff to be seen. So yeah, there is an oil industry in Los Angeles and indeed in California. You just don't always see it. It's not just the oil derricks or those oil drills or whatever that go up and down. I'm not sure what you even call those. I think they're just oil drills. Next up is healthcare. Prices for medical items and equipment are decreasing due to the recent healthcare reforms. It's much easier for people to get what they need from insurance companies with a lower cost. On top of this, people have been able to get life-saving treatment that insurance would normally withhold because of financial reasons. I say that in quotes because, quite frankly, the insurance doesn't care. They can afford it. They can definitely afford it. They just won't care. Doctors have been able to stand up for their patients, and the time it takes to receive treatment has reduced. This has been regarded as a major win for President Nestle's agenda. All of these have been put into effect in California during President Nestle's time as governor, and now they are being solidified nationwide. These are not coming without resistance, though, as education and medical bureaucracy lobbies are fighting to keep the funding that they had before, and insurance companies are fighting to keep prices higher. How this will pan out, how this pans out will remain to be seen, but for the time being, the lobbyists are losing. Just one quick side note, if you're wondering how doctors are even able to fight for their patients because they're no longer the middlemen between patients and insurance, generally speaking, the doctors have the power over insurance now. It's not the other way around. Before, and this might sound familiar, doctors would have to fight, literally, just to get a certain type of treatment that their patient actually needs. Yeah, it was that annoying. No, they don't really have to do that anymore now. Well, shouldn't have to do that anymore. Alright, next we'll turn to Daniel for more of the national news. Daniel?
Thank you, Gabriel. Let's look at the figures for the economy. The national debt is at $27,500,480,620,085 as of May 28, 2021. This is up from the 2020 debt, which was $26,945,390,000,000. While the debt has gone up, it is not as high as expected, due to the reduced borrowing this year. It's likely that the debt will continue to go down, as education and healthcare spending will decrease due to the cut in bureaucracy to these systems, as well as investment in infrastructure and job creation programs. The GDP is at $22,990,000,000,000 as of now, though GDP growth is expected to increase over the years due to infrastructure investment. Possible stimulus spending may be authorized for small and medium businesses, as well as those affected by the pandemic, which should increase GDP growth over the years. None of the stimulus includes funding or bailouts for major corporations, schools, and universities that can weather economic crisis. The stimulus includes rebates for gas and funding for banks and credit unions which could not weather the pandemic. It's in the House and will likely make it to the Senate, where it will be debated. We will keep you up to date on this bill. There is another bill working its way through Congress, which is somewhat interesting. This bill will increase the Strategic Petroleum Reserve from 714 million barrels of oil to 2 billion barrels of oil, the drawdown capacity from 4,400,000 barrels a day to 6 million a day, the number of sites from 4 to 12, and the time it takes to release the oil from 13 days to 8 days from presidential decision. This comes as the pandemic is making prices for gas rise, and is part of President Nestle's agenda of oil self-sufficiency, or at least not relying on oil from countries that do not share the values of the United States. The United States currently produces 11,307,560 barrels per day, which compared with its consumption of 19,780,000 barrels a day, means that there is a deficit. This deficit is important, as a lot of this deficit is compensated by imports from Canada and Mexico, which is not bad in and of itself. However, some of the deficit is made up of countries that do not share the values of the United States. These include Saudi Arabia, Russia, Kuwait, China, Iraq, Iran, the United Arab Emirates, Oman, and Libya, among others. In addition, the United States exports oil to China, a country that does not share the United States' values. This importing of oil makes up half of the United States' trade deficit. This does not mean that we shouldn't import oil from our allies. However, it does mean that we should increase our production and domestic capacity. We have no reason to import or export oil from and to countries that do not share the values of the United States, especially countries like China, Saudi Arabia, and Russia. This project will create 2 sites for the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in South Dakota and 2 in Montana. 2 sites are also being considered in North Dakota and 2 more in South Dakota. These sites will house crude oil and also refined products like gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. The expansion in capacity will allow for 1 billion barrels of refined petroleum products, in addition to 286 million additional barrels of crude. This project, if passed, is expected to cost $4 billion over 5 years. However, the project is estimated to employ 200,000 people. In addition, the existing facilities will be upgraded and improved, which will cost $6 billion, and $6 billion are in reserve to expand the existing facilities. Should this option be exercised, capacity will be increased to 2.8 billion barrels. The first facility to be renovated is Big Hill, which is in Winnie, Texas. This facility will be emptied, as part of the president's promise, to help reduce gas prices. Currently, this facility houses 145 million barrels, being emptied at a rate of 200,000 barrels a day. However, Big Hill will be unloaded at 1,100,000 barrels a day, before being closed down for renovation and expansion. Big Hill will be expanded to 200 million barrels, which will take place over 2 years, before being refilled starting in 2023. Enough about oil. Let's talk about transportation. Amtrak has released a plan to expand its network by 2035, and it's ambitious. There is a lot of support for this, especially in states that do not see passenger rail service. Currently, 2 of these lines are close to being introduced, the Los Angeles to Tucson Sunlight, and the Las Vegas to Los Angeles Desert Flyer. These services will start on July 24, 2021, and August 28, 2021 respectively. Both will start with diesel engines, but will likely have electric engines take over after a while. The infrastructure bill, which passed, has earmarked $60 billion for Amtrak every year for the next 10 years. This will allow Amtrak to expand its fleet, expand its network, and replace its old equipment. Amtrak will be introducing a new service in October, which will connect Milwaukee to Madison and Minneapolis-St. Paul. In November, the service connecting Milwaukee, Madison, Eau Claire, and Minneapolis-St. Paul will be introduced. Next year, Amtrak will be introducing many new services across the Midwest and South. This will also see service reintroduced to Indianapolis and Louisville. A corridor from Atlanta to Chattanooga and Nashville will also be created, along with the long-awaited Piedmont corridor from Charlotte to Atlanta. We are excited for this, as it will make transportation easier. Well, that's it for the news. Thank you for listening.